Hi Tom, how are you doing?
Good, how are you, Nick?
Good. Well, thank you for asking me back to chat to you about AI. It's a really interesting topic. If it's okay, I'd like to sort of go back to basics with AI.
Yeah,
So, and get your opinion. Where are we with AI at the moment,
yeah,
and how is it looking like it's going to impact the future of work?
yeah. So I'm not a technical expert on AI. I do use it quite a lot, but that's not really sort of where my focus lies. What I have been spending a lot of time thinking about is how is this technology, how are these tools impacting how we work, how we build companies, how we engage with the things that we do on a day-to-day basis. And I think we're at a really interesting point. I think in some ways we are way further along from a technology point of view than most people realize. And I also think it's accelerating way faster than people recognize. So I was at a conference last week. It was Agent Force conference, which is kind of part of Salesforce, and it was all about the digital workforce and how they're automating a whole bunch of different stuff. And one of the things that they were demonstrating was some work that they'd done for a client of theirs, which essentially they'd automated the entire first part of a recruitment process. So you submitted your CV, there was an agent on there that if you were a candidate you could interact with, and it'd say, hey, you're interested in these types of jobs, I've read your CV, these are the jobs that you should be thinking about, and would direct you to the right ones. But then when you applied, that's fairly basic, but when you applied, you would then get a call from the AI recruiter who would ask you a bunch of clarifying questions and then would decide based on those clarifying questions, and it had been set up to be fairly basic, whether to progress you to a first stage full interview. So there's starting to be this sort of layer of agents that are being deployed around the world that that companies are leveraging. And I think everyone's kind of trying to figure out what that means for their business. But this digital workforce is here, and it's going to grow, and it's going to increase in ability and size and impact. And I think that creates a really interesting question to answer around, well, what does that mean for work in the future? We've already seen automation in manual labor and things like that being very disruptive, but I think this is going to be even more disruptive again, in that if you're in a creative profession, or if you're in a knowledge-based profession, or if you're a consultant or a coach or something like that, well, there's going to be a lot of agents that come through that are going to be way cheaper than you, and in some cases, unless you're very, very good at what you do, probably better at it than you, or at least they might not be better at it in their moment, when you're in your moment, but they can do it at any time of the day, at the convenience of the client. They don't miss things, they don't make mistakes, they don't get tired, they're not distracted. So I think it's a really interesting time, and I think work is going to change. And there are some people think it's going to change in a positive way, and that we're actually going to get some of our free time back. The whole sort of mobile revolution has meant that we've lost all our free time, right? Like, it used to be that you left your work in the office and then you went home and you had dinner and you couldn't do anything about it until the next morning. We don't have that anymore. So there may be a world in which we sort of gain a lot of that time back, which would be nice. But then there's another world where sort of we're having to run to compete with all this technology, and we're not able to keep up, and that will cause a lot of disruption for people. So I think it's just a really interesting time at the intersection of technology and work.
Yeah, no, that's very cool. I think I've said this before, is that when AI first appeared, I was very much like, oh, no, my God, stay away.
Yeah.
I've adopted it more and more and more. I'm getting more and more comfortable with it, and I can see definitely the benefits. And actually, I had never thought about that with the social, mobile phones taking away your time and reversing that, which I think would be amazing. There are obviously people that are going to be watching this that are going to be triggered by this and terrified. Do you think part of that might be just because, like, the rate of change that we're talking about? I mean, AI wasn't around. AI wasn't in the mainstream.
Yeah.
It was just the indie band playing the local clubs and a couple of cool kids. But it's literally everywhere now in the last couple of years.
Yes.
Do you think that's part of it?
I think that's definitely part of it, and the extent at which that change is happening. So I saw some stats this was about a month ago, so it's probably not accurate anymore. Again, this is the pace we're operating at. But ChatGPT, the first version was released about 2.5, almost 3 years ago. They have 800 million daily users.
That's incredible.
Yeah, which is the fastest any company has ever got to that point.
Like 1 in 6 people?
Something like that,
Yeah.
yeah. And a lot of their users actually are in emerging economies. So they have if you compare it to other technology waves, they have a disproportionate amount of users in India and in the Far East and in South America, and, you know, economies that perhaps couldn't compete with the Western economies or the more established economies. So I think that's one of the other things that's happening, is it's leveling the playing field a bit. But yeah, the adoption's been huge. The progress, the speed of progress is huge. And I think that's it. I think, you know, it's kind of the 5 stages of grief, right? It's like first you have denial. I'll never be able to do my job. And then gradually people are starting to see, oh, it actually can do my job now.
Yeah,
or
yeah.
90% of my job or 80% of my job. Which then you get into anger and all the other. I'm not an expert on the 5 stages of grief.
No.
But
I keep thinking of the U-bend of despair. I think that's the thing, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
like, yeah, it's anger, avoidance, doubt, acceptance. I
yeah,
think.
exactly.
I've got that horribly wrong, but anyway, you know, we'll skip
That
over
sort of idea, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's right. I think at first people were like, oh, this isn't very good. Which at first it wasn't. Now it's really good. And it's getting better and better and better. You know, the latest Google release where they were able to completely generate video content, but realistic video content, I think that shocked a lot of people. The way these agents are able to interact with each other and the way they're able to make phone calls. And, you know, I get sales calls now from AI agents. And you can still tell, but I think it's only going to be so long till you can't really tell that much.
Yeah.
So yeah, the pace is definitely part of it. I think it's unnerving people a lot.
Yeah, and I think, you know, so bearing in mind that pace, you know, I think it's fair to say that companies need to adapt, don't they? And first, what would you say to companies that maybe are sort of hiding behind the sofa about this? What would you say to them? What do they need to start doing?
I think for companies, it's really straightforward. You have to start looking at how to integrate AI and other computational tools. Like, it's not just AI, there's a lot of other technology that's moving quickly, but AI being the center of conversation into how you work. Because the reality is that, you know, if you're running a management consulting firm, for example, the things that take your very, very highly paid management consultants 2 weeks to do, an AI agent, if it's trained correctly, can do in a couple of minutes with the right inputs and all that kind of stuff. It doesn't mean it can do everything that those people do. But then imagine having all those reports people have to write and presentations they have to put together and pieces of content they have to do and all that sort of administrative work that kind of isn't solely what your partners are able to do. Like, other people could do that. Well, imagine being able to do that for a couple of £100 a month and do it in a very, very short space of time with really high quality. But then also what that would free up those people to be able to do. So instead of having to have 20 partners who are all being paid a huge amount, you know, I'm thinking of the big consultancies here, being paid hundreds of thousands, you could have 2 doing the same amount of work. And there's a couple of ways you can look at that. Either you reduce your headcount and reduce your costs, or you massively increase your capacity. If you don't embrace, and I think a lot of companies are starting to get over that resistance. I think companies are further ahead than individuals are in a lot of cases, because they have to. It's a competitive imperative, because someone is going to use this technology to disrupt your industry. And if you don't do it, your competition will. And so when they come along and they can do the same work for 1/10 of the cost, or they can do it quicker, or they can actually do it better because they've found ways to use technology to produce even better work, not just cheaper and quicker work, and they can do it cheaper and quicker, well, suddenly your whole business model doesn't make sense. So I think, you know, I think we're not far away from, and when I say not far away, I think maybe a few years, if that, from companies having a handful of AI platforms, tools, whatever they are, sat at the center of their company, seeing everything, feeding back various bits of data, and helping leadership of that company make better decisions. I think the capability's there. I think it's more an adoption thing than anything else. But yeah, you have to adapt, otherwise you'd be left behind by people who are just moving quicker.
That's really interesting. I'm just going to go on a slight tangent, if
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
all right, because obviously AI in the photography industry is it is an absolute trigger, all right. This is, and it is polarizing and stuff. And I was chatting to another photographer recently, and we were talking about AI. And you know, I'm quite open in that I draw the line at generative AI for professional,
Yeah.
you know, reasons. And you know, however, I use AI in my editing, and it has even the little bit that I use has speeded things up, you know. And suddenly, something that might have taken me half an hour, I can get through variations in about 30 seconds.
Yes.
And I can work out, you know, and when I say this, and just for the, you know, before anybody starts writing in and challenging my ethics and morals, this is stuff like, you know, if I've shot a portrait of somebody and there's a little bit of the background in the thing, we're taking that out.
Yeah,
we're
yeah,
not
yeah.
changing the fundamentals of the picture. But the thing that I found interesting is whenever AI comes up as a conversation, there's two types of people. There are the people that are yelling that it's the end of the world. Then there are the people that are not saying anything. And you know that those are the people that are using AI. and they're the ones that, you know, have adapted it and have brought it into their system. And they don't want to say, and for whatever reason that is, they don't want to mention it. And I'm totally with you. I think people have to adapt, you know.
Yes.
And actually, I suppose that leads into my next question: is how do people adapt? You know, what do they need to do to prepare mentally for this?
Yeah, well, I think people are still really scared of it. A lot of people, right? I think it's interesting because we're at a point where there's a window of opportunity for individuals. So if they're doing what you're doing and leaning into it and going, okay, well, actually, these tools are going to make us more effective, and actually, I can do this now more effectively than everybody else can. And because 90% of people are avoiding it, or maybe it's 80%, or maybe it's less than that now, then that gives you an advantage. But that window of advantage is going to be pretty small. I think, you know, everybody has gone through a bit of a curve of resistance through to some level of acceptance, right? And some people are just further ahead than others, but people will get there. So it's only an advantage for a certain period of time. So I think the first thing is to, if you're afraid of it, instead of saying no, just start saying maybe. You don't have to say yes yet, but just go and see what you can do. It's stuff like, you know, I noticed Photoshop recently now has this generative expand thing. So you can have a picture that you've genuinely taken, but is a close-up, and you want that to be in a bigger environment, and then you can just hit a button and it will expand the picture. That sort of stuff is just enhancing your creativity, right? People who are using that will be able to offer much better products to their clients because they can give them so many different varieties. I think the days are gone now, right, where you sort of come back from a shoot and it's like, oh man, I didn't get that shot or that variation of that shot. So first of all, there's a window of opportunity. It's closing fast. So if you don't want to be catching up, you sort of should get ahead. And these tools are pretty easy to learn. Some of them are more complex than others. But if you go to ChatGPT or Claude or DeepSeek or whatever your LLM of choice is and go, hi, I'm new to this. This is what I do. Teach me how to use you in a way that's going to benefit my business or this thing I'm doing, then it'll take you through step by step. And then you can say, which tools should I be using? And it'll take you through those. And like, this is the great thing about this technology is that you don't actually have to have a high level of proficiency to get good at it. You just have to start using it. So I think just start using it and see what can be done. I think there's always, especially in creative work, like photography or music or art or things like that, I think there's always going to be room for the human element. I heard about an artist recently who, I forget his name, but he had produced 50 pieces over, I think he was an abstract artist, and he produced these 50 pieces of a series he was putting together. And he'd included a certificate in those pieces that basically said this generative AI has not been used in the production of this. I painted this myself. That that is where the value is, especially if you're an abstract artist. You're probably closer to being replaced than if you're a sort of still, if you paint still lives or things like that. So yeah, I think start using it. I think then it's easy to say, but I think it's important to sort of accept a level of uncertainty around where this is going, because, you know, for example, I've been working on a company recently. I've been using AI to build an app. If you'd said to me a year ago that I would be able to actually build an app without learning how to code, then I would have thought that was ridiculous. And it's not quite ready yet, and so maybe it is still ridiculous. Who knows? But yeah, if there's things that you want to do that you haven't done yet in your business or in your work or in your day-to-day life, it's worth going and seeing if you could use technology and AI in particular to help accelerate some of those things.
Yeah, I think this is quite interesting, isn't it? And I don't want to go, because this could be a whole tangent in itself, about the branding of AI, because even AI sounds ominous. It's like artificial intelligence, and it sounds, you know. And from a personal point of view, I mean, and you're right, there's loads of these out there. I've got a few that I use for different reasons, but if there's anything that's like emotional or supportive that I need, I use Claude.
Okay.
Mainly because it feels like I'm talking to a human, you know, right. I'm talking to Claude, you know, and it takes that sort of edge, you know. I mean, obviously, you know, ChatGPT and Perplexity, it's all like this like cool tech name, but Claude is very human. Yeah. And I think by its nature, the LLM itself is quite, you know, sort of soft touch and stuff. So you can ask it personal questions and it'll come back with, and I've done this both for work, you know, and if I've been worried about something, I've asked it a work question. I've asked it personal questions, you know, and it's bonkers what comes back. And I think that's taken the fear out of it for me, is because I have had a play. But I think you're right. I think that's a good point about just trying it and trying to get, you know, and taking that fear away and that uncertainty, because change is the only constant, and, you know, it's only going to carry on, as you say. So with all this in mind, and maybe another carrot for people, what impact do you see this having on companies and humans in companies? Yeah, well, so I think if we look sort of a bit further down the line, and when I say a bit further, I think that the horizons have shifted on this. Like, you used to say, look a bit further down the line, you were talking 5 or 10 years. I think now it's like 18 to 24 months. And that's the first thing that's changing, I think, is the timelines on which companies and individuals should be making plans. It's always been hard to predict where things will be in 5 years. It's impossible to predict where things are going to be in 5 years now. So having a long-term plan is still a good thing, but understanding that the detail of your execution of that plan is going to be completely different than you expect, even in that time horizon, is the first thing. And that applies to people in their careers. It applies to companies when they're making business plans. I think the reality is that companies in the future will be smaller. You know, we saw an announcement from, or there was a post or an email, I think it was, from Andy Jassy at Amazon, the CEO of Amazon, essentially saying, amongst a lot of other things, because they tend to hide these announcements in amongst lots of things, that the company will be smaller, that they'll be reducing the size of their workforce. And obviously Amazon's one of the biggest employers in the world. Interesting, the outcry was not about the fact that the warehouses would be employing less people, because I don't think that's actually in their agenda. They're obviously going to look at how they automate more stuff, but they already have a lot of automation. It was the white-collar knowledge workers that were going to be reduced in size, and so that was where the outcry came from. And I think that will be common across all companies. I think, you know, you look at OpenAI itself, has less than 100 employees. And they use their technology and other technologies to augment those employees. And I think this will be and that's a multi-billion-dollar valuation company. Sam Altman has predicted that we're not far away from the first billion-dollar company that only has one person in it, because of these tools that are available. So I don't think that will be common, but companies will certainly be smaller. I think what you'll also see, though, is more companies. So I was listening to an economist the other day on a podcast, and she was saying that actually over the next 25 years, over the next 4 to 5 years, not 25 years, they don't expect
unemployment to increase. Some of that is because there's a large generation of baby boomers who are going to be leaving the workforce, but they are expecting more companies to be founded, and therefore the overall level of manpower that's going to be needed is going to be about the same, but it'll be distributed across more organizations because it's becoming easier and easier to start a business. You know, if you have an idea about what you want to do, you can use technology to spin up a company without having to hire 50 people. Now, the limit that we still have is time, right? And we're being more productive, but we're still limited by the amount of time we have. So we're still going to need other people to help us, and we're going to need people with other expertise. Not all of it can be done through technology. You know, it's important to recognize that if you think about LLMs in particular, which is mostly what we're talking about when we're talking about AI, they're just prediction engines. They just predict what the next word is going to be. And you can use that in lots of different ways. But I think as a result, a lot of them tend to agree with whatever you tell them. So there's still going to be room for dissent and a group of people to do that. But yeah, I think that's the first thing, is that companies are going to be smaller, are going to be, and then therefore people's careers are going to be more fragmented. So that's the impact for individuals, is that you'll probably work on more things throughout your career. You'll probably have shorter tenures, partly because the companies will last a shorter amount of time, but also because there's just going to be smaller workforces, more companies around. So we could well see an increase in competition for certain types of people. But I think, you know, acknowledging that the value of what you do today may not, you may not be able to maintain the value of what you do by doing the same things tomorrow as you do today. So you've got to constantly look for ways to educate yourself, to find new ways to add value, whether as a leader of a company or a founder or as an employee. The nature of what companies and markets value will be different, because more and more things will become less valuable because they're easier to do. The reason we pay people to do stuff is because it's hard to do most of the time, or it takes too much time, or that kind of stuff. You remove that equation, and actually then if what you do is no longer hard, you can't charge as much money for it as an employee or as a consultant or whatever it is. So there's then going to be more frontiers you can explore. So I think just constantly trying to look at, well, where is the value? What can I do that nobody else can? Or what, the other thing that you could potentially compete on is being the very best in the world at things. And you can use technology to help you become that. You can use technology to help you build a plan to develop yourself, or whatever it might be. But I think, you know, the people who are the top 10 in the world at whatever they do will probably be all right from an employment point of view. Yeah. The people who are just okay at it, those are the people who are going to find it difficult, yeah. I think.
And you know, if we're being brutally honest, that's no different to now anyway, is it? I mean, you know, I'm a fairly average photographer, and there's David Bailey out there, you know, and you know, it's so I think that's something good to keep in mind. I guess something that you mentioned then about the fragmentation of work and, yeah, you know, different opportunities, you could probably call that, you know, a success of AI, you know, making things more interesting for people. What other successes do you think are out there for companies and people?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. In that a lot of the time when we go and work for a new company, we join because we're excited about what they're doing. Now, sometimes you just need a job, right? But a lot of the time, if you're at a point where you're established in your career, you join to do interesting things. Is that thing as interesting 8 years later when you've been slogging it out and dealing with all the politics and that kind of stuff? Usually not. So I think, yeah, being able to move more freely between different projects, not for everybody, but for some people, could be a really positive thing. I think as well, we touched on it earlier. I think there are ways in which technology and AI in particular can free up a lot of your time. And so that could mean several things. So it could mean you just do more stuff. You're more productive. You're running 4 companies, or you're doing freelance work for 5 or 6 different people. Or it could mean you can spend a bit more time with your family. You can spend more time, if you love mountain climbing, you can spend more time doing that. If you are really into, everyone's into paddle now, right? If you're really into paddle, you can spend more time playing paddle, and find ways to sort of generate income while you sleep. Because it used to be that the big advantage for people who owned land originally, but then enterprises and factories and things like that, was they were able to employ people to do work for them that multiplied their ability to produce output, right? So like Bill Gates, when he ran Microsoft and had 40,000 people working for him, didn't have 24 hours in a day. Bill Gates had, if you multiply it out, he had, whatever it is, 320,000 hours in a day. Now you can achieve a lot more with that than you can with just 24. So you can think of technology like that. You can multiply your ability to impact what you do. And it's not just about work, it's about everything, right? So, I know people who've used tools like Replit, which builds simple applications to sort of set up a pocket money tracker for their kids. So like it assigns value to certain tasks, and then at the end of the week, the kids log on and they say which task they've done, and the parent approves it, and it transfers that money to their bank account, and that kind of. You can do stuff with your family as well. So I think that could be a positive impact too. I think there are problems that we face as a society as well that currently we don't have the capability to solve. So, diseases that we still haven't cured, the emissions crisis, the climate crisis. Some of these big problems are kind of beyond our ability to process cognitively. I was speaking to someone recently who runs or is involved in the executive team of a company that are using machine learning to generate new drug targets. And he's been in drug development for his whole career, for 30 years. And essentially what he was talking about was that the structure of these drug targets is so complex that it's actually when you get past a certain point, it's beyond our cognitive ability to recognize the patterns in it. But machine learning tools have a greater cognitive capacity, although it's not cognitive, right? But they have a greater capacity to recognize patterns. So what we're doing by using those tools is actually extending our cognitive capacity in the same way that the plow extended our capacity to plow a field, in the same way that the engine increased our capacity to travel, all that kind of stuff. So we're going to be able to apply that to problems that we're not physiologically able to solve at the moment. So I think that's all the positive stuff. I think as well, there are potential downsides, and I think that we have to be, I'm an optimist about this stuff, but I think we have to be aware that there are going to be challenges ahead, and it is going to be really disruptive as well.
That time thing, I think that's going to be a huge, huge success, really, isn't it?
I read this the other night, so I don't know the veracity of this quote, but hopefully it's true. Apparently Einstein said, "Why remember something you can look up?"
Yes, really good.
So it's kind of like, this is one of the challenges facing the school system now. It's like, why remember all these dates and stuff? You can find them out really easily. You're better off applying your energy to things that actually deserve it, rather than simple problems that can be easily solved, right?
Yeah. But do you think there's anything that's not going to change, with AI? Do you see anything on that front? Is there hope?
Is there
hope that it's not all completely going to, revolve?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of things will change. And I think, you've got to bear in mind as well that, it's not just technology change that we're seeing in the world right now. There's a huge amount of political unrest, economic change, you've got the rise of cryptocurrency, you've got all the political tension that's happening around the world, which is significant, right? And then in societies, there's a lot of tension between different groups and things like that. So I think we are seeing just lots of change on lots of different axes in the world right now. But yes, I think there are going to be some things that don't change. And I think the things that aren't going to change are the things that are kind of rooted in our biology as people, because those things haven't really changed for 2,000 years. So there's nothing to indicate they're going to change now. I think people want connection. They want to be part of something. They want to grow as individuals. They want to feel like they're contributing and that they're having impact. And there's lots of psychological theory around this, in that there are fundamental human needs and there's different ways of displaying them. But those things are all driven, they're not actually psychological in nature, although they manifest in psychology. They're biological, and biology changes pretty slowly. It does change, but it changes pretty slowly. And so I think there are things that will stay the same. I think in terms of work and companies and how it'll impact there, I think how we think about our role as an employer has to change, but based around those things that will remain the same. So what I mean by that is that if I look at where sort of demand is going, if I look at where companies are heading, if I look at what employees are demanding of employers now, because we do a lot of this work in the companies that I run, there's three things that companies in the future will have to do to be successful in sort of engaging and retaining people, which will still be important. You might have less people, but you still got to engage them. And, you know, less is relative, right? Whereas a company where you only needed 6 people might not need any employees. A company in which you needed 6,000 might still need 700 or 800, right? So there's still a workforce there. Three things that these companies are going to need to do. The first is that they will need to give people a bigger picture to contribute to. So a mission to contribute to, something they can't achieve on their own, that they can bring them together with others to deliver. So that could be solving a big societal problem. It could be something that's going to take a long time. It could just be a really cool project that people will enjoy. It could be, you know, that they want to have the best ice cream shop in the town and they want to make people in the town happy. It doesn't have to be something super grand. But giving some people a bigger vision to contribute to is going to be really, really important. And they might contribute to that for 10 years, or it might be for 6 or 7 months. People will flit in and out, as we've talked about, but giving them a bigger picture to align around is key. I think the second thing is that learning and development is no longer an option for, it's no longer optional for companies. So things are going to keep changing so much that even your best people will need to continually learn and develop and adapt to continue to be effective. And so companies will need to become a hub of growth, development, learning, that kind of stuff to keep people engaged and keep people effective. And people like to learn and people like to grow. So just by doing that, you'll engage and retain them more effectively. And then finally, I think we're sort of, it's ironic, right? We're in a more connected world than we've ever been in before, but we're also in more isolation than we've ever been in before. And you see this being played through in all sorts of stats about loneliness and separation and things like that. And actually a lot of these digital tools are exacerbating that. Even where we're connected to people who think the same as us, and we're in these echo chambers and bubbles, and this phenomenon's kind of widely recognized. So I think the other thing that companies can do for people is to give them a way to meet and connect with people who are different from them, but share the same values, because that's important to get an effective workforce together. But sharing the same values doesn't mean you have to be from the same place, or that you're from the same background, or that you're the same gender or race or age or that kind of stuff. I think you can have a really diverse population with similar values. So creating that opportunity to connect with people that you wouldn't naturally connect with and build relationships, and I guess it ties into that second point about learning, is that's how you learn about the world. I think those are the three things that companies will have to do in the future, and they're really rooted in these kind of biological needs that aren't really going to change. I think the other thing for individuals that isn't going to change is that it might be a change for some people in terms of how they see the world, but actually this is already the case. You are rewarded based on the value that you provide to the market. Not your value as a human being, your value in terms of what you do for others that they can't do for themselves, or they can't do to the same level, or they don't want to do, is the other way you provide value. So that's not going to change. you're constantly going to have to look for new ways to find value, but that core fundamental truth is going to remain.
I'm so glad that you talked a bit about biology in that, because this is ever since AI, appeared, this has always been my thing, is that we've not changed.
Yeah.
Since we've been roaming the savannah, and all of our responses to stuff are all based upon that, and that biology hadn't shifted, and AI is not going to shift that. It's about how we interact with the tool and stuff. So, I think I know the answer to the next question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Are you more optimistic or pessimistic about AI and its role in the future for humanity as in general and companies specifically?
Yeah. Listen, I think you have to be optimistic, because the pessimistic view we can't do anything about. The view in which it's Skynet and we all get wiped out, and there's no place for people in the world in the future, or there's a place where they are like the Matrix and they're fuel for the machines and all that kind of stuff. If that's the future we're heading towards, then there's not really much we can do about that. Like, there's not much we can do to prepare for that. Yeah. That will be the final challenge that we, like humanity, doesn't overcome. I think, we have, over the last several thousand years, we've faced real existential crises as societies and as a race, and, in terms of diseases, wars, all sorts of things. And we've overcome all of them. We've found ways to overcome all of them. That's not to say it hasn't been painful and it hasn't been difficult, but we have found a way. So I think that track record of doing that makes me a believer in humanity and makes me optimistic about it. And that's the only future we can prepare for, is a future in which we work alongside technology and we work alongside AI and we use it in our own endeavors. As a partner, and I think it probably does become a bit of a partnership rather than a master-servant relationship. Because as I say, if it goes the other way and the machines are going to take over, it's too late. The cat's already out of the bag, right? So we've started down that path already.
You'd hope that if that was going to happen, somebody would just unplug the, unplug the computer or whatever, turn it off and on again, and it would sort out. I'm being flippant, of course. I mean, I don't know if there is just one supercomputer.
Don't let the machines hear you.
Yeah, that's true. But no, I think you're right, and I think it's a really good chance for humanity to capture this tool, and I keep referring to it as a tool because that's how I see it, to answer some of the biggest problems that we've ever had, and who knows what discoveries are out there. So it's
I think the other thing to think about is that maybe the other way this goes, and this is sort of a not fully formed thought, is that there is so much disruption that the machines don't necessarily take over, but so many people are disrupted that we just see more and more clashes between people, and those clashes escalate and become civil wars and unrest and things like that. And I think that is a distinct possibility. And so I think then the other thing that we probably should be thinking about is, how can we use the extra capacity that we have because of these tools, or how can we use the extra capability we have because of these tools to find ways for people to live together more harmoniously, to be more accepting of each other, to sort of apply what they do to a way that adds value. Because I think, if you create a society in which 50-60% of people can't find work and can't survive, well, they're going to do stuff to survive, and that then becomes a different issue to deal with. And so I think we do have to think about that seriously, and think about that level of disruption and displacement that's possible. How do we ease that for people? But yeah, I think there are, interestingly, the tools that we have make it more likely we'll be able to come up with solutions for those things. We've just got to apply them to the right issues.
Oh, yeah, 100%. I think, I think, and you've touched upon it. I think it's that uncertainty, isn't it? And it's the uncertainty, and God, I'm going to sound like Yoda, and that leads to fear, which, leads to anger and stuff. And, but, I'm with you. I think that we'll be able to control it. We will, it'll be regulated and stuff. but it will be a force for good, I think, eventually. So yeah, no, it's really, really interesting. So thanks for sitting down with us, Tom, and going through it. Was there anything you wanted to add, actually, before AI switches off all the cameras and the lights?
No, I think we've covered most of it. I just think it's a really exciting time. I think, there's if you think about excitement and fear, they're kind of the same thing. It's just about where they come from, right? Like when you get excited about something, you feel anxious in the same way. Your pulse raises, you breathe shorter, you start to notice more things. The same thing happens when you're afraid. It's just about sort of the origin of that response. So I think, what we're seeing at the moment is people experiencing both, and some more of one than the other. But I think it's a time where, we're in a period now that's going to be incredibly formative for the world, and that people will look back on in 50 years' time as a key moment in history. And we're living in that right now. And so while, yes, there is a lot of uncertainty and a lot of change, what an amazing time to be alive.
Absolutely. Now, I know I'm really lucky to be able to pick your brains about this stuff on camera and off. I mean, what's the best way for people to get a hold of you if they want to have a chat? And you're an open guy, I know that if anybody rang up or emailed or whatever to sit down, what's the best way to get a hold of you to talk about this stuff?
Yeah, well, I'm always happy to talk about these things. I spend a lot of my time sort of at the intersection of work and culture and technology and business and things like that, and I think about this stuff quite a lot, so always happy to chat. People can get me on tom@versapia.ai, or you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty easy to get hold of there.
Wicked. All right, thanks, Tom.
Thanks very much.